So the cover is a triptych from the three continents. We got Burma and the famous Ubain Bridge, which is near Mandalay, where Orwell went to the police academy after Eton. So those are the his first trips abroad. And then from then he was posted to Catalonia. Later on, we're talking 1922, and then the middle one is a poster, a recruitment poster from the home brigades and some of the anarchist fellow travelers during the Spanish Civil War in Barcelona. And then we got the Medina, the old part of Marrakesh on the right. And that's where he spent 6 months with Eileen, his partner, in 1939, after coming back from Spain. And
right. Now, the book is dedicated to Eileen O'Shaughnessy in the next image.
That's right.
Often underrated figure in all of this. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I mean, Eileen was, like, his life support system. A very intelligent woman. She went to Oxford and have a degree in English and literature, and she was doing a postgrad in educational psychology at UCL in London when she met Orwell at a party in Hampstead. And then, when they got together, she was, proofing and advising him on all his, writings, not just the books and journals, but his journalistic writing as well. She was very good, had a good eye for editing and things like that. So was always creative muse. So dedicated to her with an illustration by my daughter, Julio Etchart, from an archival photograph.
So if you're an admirer of Orwell's work, then you're also an admirer of Eileen's work, whether you know it or not. That's the gist of that.
Absolutely.
And the next image is also by your daughter, I think.
Well, yes, Camille made that illustration as well.
We're going to start. This is actually the epilogue of the book, but we're going to start with it. It's the point at which Julio imagines the conversations that he would have had with Orwell in all the various places, Latin America and the Middle East, where he's worked as a photojournalist. You want to say something about those places and the conversations you'd like to have had with him?
Yes, I mean, the setting is probably a bar off the Ramblas in Barcelona by the look of it. And it just, with every people we admire and nice, and we wish, who are not here any longer with us, we always wish we had that conversation, that meeting, and that this is no exception, really. So I would ask him about more details about his experience in the trenches in the Civil War, about shooting the elephant,
yes,
all that sort of, and the pressure on the colonial officer to do her duty, which is in those days, and also, I mean, all these wanderings around in the high Atlas in Marrakesh. I found that quite enticing, actually. And in exchange, I would share my own experiences, and I move to the next one. The things I've been covering since in the last 30, 40 years, the civil war in El Salvador, and in Lebanon, the Intifada in Palestine, the refugee crisis. Recently I went back to Lesbos to cover that, the terrible flow of people. They're not welcome in Europe, and they have to suffer. So after such a long trip from the Middle East, the environmental kind of catastrophe we were walking into, slashing and burning of rainforest, we talk about a bit more later, I believe. And finally, and on this, the terrible pandemic we're going through.
And the next image actually is we're going to talk a little bit about your work on the environment. You did win a prize for environmental photography, if I'm right.
Yeah, well, a couple of prizes. One for the Rome Press, and then for another one for the Sony organization as well. And this is just I did, and I was commissioned by the European Union and UNEP to produce an exhibition on environmental issues, which we call the 4 elements. So the impact, it's a metaphor on the impact on the destruction of the environment on air, fire, water, and earth. The 4 traditional elements. The Chinese have a 5th one, which is fire. So this is a picture in Slovakia. So the term pollution from the thermonuclear power station, and a juxtaposition. And the next one is oil pollution from the, this is in Venezuela, Maracaibo Lake. One of the, is the 3rd oil producer that's not produced in the world. So the pollution caused on birds and wildlife, you know, totally covered in oil, poor things. And slash and burn in the Amazon in Brazil, when I went a few times, and which we now know with Bolsonaro as president, it's getting worse and worse every week. You know,
we're going to actually the deforestation link actually with the next image. We'll move on to his time in Burma now. That's right. Burma. Orwell, as Julio said, right out of school, he went to work in Myanmar, now Burma to him, in 1922. He stayed there for 5 years. It's worth saying that he based his first novel on that experience, Burmese Days, and he was seeing the machinery of empire up very close, and it changed him very dramatically. And he wrote several, not just the novel, actually wrote several wonderful, Julio mentioned Shooting an Elephant. There's also a hanging, there's some remarkable reportage that came out of that. It's less well known than it might be that the Rangoon Oil Company, which was a British company that was founded in 1885, it was an enormous concern. Actually, the Anglo-Persian Oil, the future BP, actually emerged as a subsidiary of the Rangoon Oil Company, so that Myanmar, Burma is has been a territory that's been batted to and fro between imperial players via these extractive industries for a very long time. Florey, the main character in the novel, is himself a timber merchant. Do you want to say a few things about, this is the river Irrawaddy, I should say, this is Upper Myanmar. Say a few, you've been there rather more recently and seen the Chinese presence that's moved in since. Tell us some more about that, Julio.
That's right, yes. And I show that now, and then we go to the
Good
one. So this is an example of it, really. John Florey, as you said, was a timber merchant. Like most of the expats at the time were involved in the extractive industries, in opium, dealing with opium. His Orwell's father was an admin, you know, colonial admin in the opium industry. Let's not forget that. So the new colonial power now is China, and that massive piece of mahogany or teak, and mahogany and teak, both of them, they're going all the way up to China, up the Irrawaddy River, Kipling's Road to Mandalay, yeah. Mm-hmm. And they becoming the main, you know, controllers and as I said, new colonial power in Burma, Myanmar, and the whole of Southeast Asia, as we know. And
do you want to go back to that image? Yeah, that exactly. Yeah. Say something about the old British club in Qatar, the town where he lived. Yeah.
Travel was time machine, really, because this was taken about 8 years ago. It's still there. As you can see, the veranda untouched, you know, from those days, or Victorian veranda, colonial setting. And but downstairs used to be the you know, the pool room and the, you know, and the bar and all that, where they all kind of they would drink gin and tonic and pale ale and toasted king in those days. It's been transformed into a classroom for local children. They're doing remedial maths there, you can see. And I was really kind of, I wrote in my travelogue, which is in the first part of the first section of the book, how I was quite intrigued and pleasantly surprised by it. It's been transformed into something more useful than just an old colonial club where
Right.
the locals were not allowed in.
And the next image is a street scene. Oh no, it's not. It's the railway. It's the railway station, which has also hardly changed.
It's incredible. A railway station, like the British Club, goes back 100 years. But this is an important hub, communication hub, and because Katuda linked to Mandalay by train. I took the train from and it's also part of my travelogue from Mandalay. 12 hours torturous journey, really. Very bumpy, railroad. But when I got to the station, it was, incredible. I was in dreamland, really, like the rest of the region of Upper Myanmar, where Kaffa is, and that's so. I decided to. I shot everything on color digital, raw files, and then I just I tweaked it into sepia vignette effect to give it some kind of period look to the images that I felt were, the setting hadn't changed in a long time. I did that in all three countries.
Whereas the following image certainly has changed a good deal since Orwell would have known. I mean, the monks, he had a dreadful relationship with the monks, didn't he? He didn't feel terribly welcome by them and didn't like them in return very much. Say something about this image.
Well, I mean, I just trying to I'm like the rest of the book, I'm contemporizing the whole setting and trying to, quicken, getting a bit out of the box. And just, that's why the typical kind of corner shop in Kaffa, and it's actually his motorbike, his scooter. He just left it there and choosing some lottery tickets, and juxtaposed with some of the local beauty or influencers, and DVD in those days, because it was about 8-9 years ago that I took that. So the present day Myanmar.
Okay, right. We'll move on to Spain next. Orwell arrived in Spain in December 1936, and he stayed until July 1937. His original idea was to write articles, but it very rapidly became apparent to him that he needed to fight. He joined the publ militia, as Julio's already mentioned them, a small leftist militia. And he fought on the Aragon front, which is where this photograph is taken. Before we actually talk about his time in Spain, Julio, say a bit more about the way in which during your upbringing in Uruguay, you knew these stories about the Civil War through relations and others. Just tell us something about that and about how that linked with the dictatorship in Uruguay and your early experience of all that.
Sure. My Etchart is a French Basque name. My parents are of French Basque stock. My father was born in Uruguay, but my grandparents were from the French Basque country, Biarritz, Bayonne region, and grandparents. They emigrated to Uruguay because they were conscientious objectors. They didn't want to. They were French Basque nationalists. They didn't want to fight for France against Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War. We're going back to 1870s.
Okay.
The 1870s. So there was a choice of prisoner or exile, and they chose the latter. So that's my upbringing, and during the Civil War, there were a lot of Basque and Catalonian and other Spanish Republicans who managed to flee to Latin America and weren't really embraced by many countries. Uruguay, Argentina, Mexico, Chile were the main ones. So there's a big community of refugees or ex-refugees, and the second generation when I was young. And my uncle, my father, would take me to the social clubs, so we'll, you know, listen to the harrowing tales. You know, obviously the eldest ones, about the experience of the Civil War and the repression by Franco and the fascist regime.
And did the arguments that had gone on in Spain during the Civil War between anarchists and communists, did that continue in the face of the dictatorship as it emerged in Uruguay, or was there a degree of reconciliation between them faced with this sort of common enemy?
In Uruguay, they were more together than in say, for example, in Chile, where the Popular Unity Government was a big, you know, it was a coalition of forces from the left, and also they included some Christian Democrats. But there were bitter infighting between them, and that really didn't help Allende, and that was one of the many reasons why Pinochet managed to stage the coup, obviously because they got big support from Nixon and Kissinger at the time, you know. But yes, that was the problem.
And you later worked in Chile as a photojournalist, right? We will get back to the Civil War, but I'm just curious about this. Say something about your work as a photojournalist out there.
So it was very difficult to find these trenches.
Okay, we'll do that. All right, fine. Okay, yes.
Actually, was there for 3 months and then went back, you know, after a short respite in, well, not really quite a respite, but went back to Barcelona and back to the front line. There was after Franco, the death of Franco in 1975, the Spanish, you know, government in the transition decided to have, they made a deal, you know, and it was called the Pact of Forgetting, el Pacto del Olvido. So basically amnesty for everybody, and just let's move on and forget about the past, because the country had been bitterly divided. And in every family, there was a member of the Republicans and a member of the pro-Franco. So they move on. And I was asking for directions, Jaraca in Aragon, which is 100 miles west of Barcelona, and asking for directions to the Ruta Orwell, and also the other side of the road was the Franco front line. And people just say, oh, pretending not to know. Of course, it's just, you know, small town, small village, and everybody knows everybody. But basically, they chose not to know, not to remember. And that was quite telling, actually.
And yet, at the same time, we just stay there. I mean, you mentioned when we were talking about this that actually there was this reluctance to talk about it, but at the same time, they were very well maintained on both sides. There were stretches of the trenches where those who considered themselves like heirs of the Republican tradition had kept them very well maintained.
That's right. On the Republican, on the side where Orwell fought, they were well maintained by the Orwell Foundation and the many kind of Republican, which he was just one of the fighters. The Republican side and the PSOE, the Socialist Party that was in government in Spain in the 80s for 2 or 3 terms under Felipe González. Obviously, they pay attention to that and they restore them. But likewise, on the other side, there's a very strong, the Falange, the right wing forces in Spain are still very strong, very powerful. They got a lot of money. And they restore the other side. So
okay. That's it. Just moving back to Barcelona now, he came back from the front, having previously had a very kind of a transformational experience of an egalitarian society as he was passing through Barcelona on his way to the front. He came back and found that the situation had changed dramatically. And this is a photograph of the reassertion of bourgeois Barcelona. That's about right?
That's right. I think for the next one, I go back to this one because this shows what the kind of that's what that Orwell experienced the first time he went. The Rosa de Fox, the anarchist, and the CNT, the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo, the socialist TUC, you know, as it were.
Yeah, union. Yeah.
And it's these two places where there's sort of there's a lot of memorabilia about that. So Orwell would have seen that multiplied 1,000 times, because in every street, he said, you know, there were banners and things, and everybody was in Spanish, you know, we have the colloquial tu and the more kind of formal usted. Everybody was tuteando each other, which is a very, very significant, you know. But then when he went back from the front, he would have seen something like this, you know, back to bourgeois Barcelona. Barcelona is a very, used to be and still is, and now back again, a very prosperous and bourgeois mercantile city. So now we've seen something like this.
He also came back to he also came back to a Barcelona in which there was now very serious infighting between, infighting on the left between the communist government and the PUM, this leftist militia that he was a part of. One of the places where that conflict flared was this cafe. It was actually in the Cafe Mocha. It's written about in Homage to Catalonia, which is obviously the book that Orwell wrote out of this experience.
Right on the Ramblas, the main thoroughfare of Barcelona.
It's on the Ramblas. There were some government assault guards who were holed up in there, not quite sure if they were going to be attacking the PUM or not. The whole situation was eventually diffused. I wonder if you were asked by the present day owner of that cafe to mark its meaning during the Civil War, what would you say, rather than just have it as a tourist restaurant? How would you mark its meaning?
Unlike the other ones, the Pasionaria, the Rosa de Fox, and the La Libertaria. Sorry, Pasionaria was a great heroine of the Civil War. Dolores Urruti. La Libertaria, you know, actually, for commercial reasons as well, but also ideological. They have all the memorabilia. The Mocha just decided to, obviously, probably had a Francoist owner or somebody who's indifferent, and just it's a business. So very boring, kind of contemporary, kind of quick lunch, quick food bar. So I would advise him to put some memorabilia. Back there was
something in.
This place was used by both, you know, both sides of the forces with the Republican. But Orwell was based here for about 3 days after he came back, and he was dying to have a break and spend some time with Eileen, who was in Barcelona with him. She was working at the office of the PUM brigades and trying to get more international support and fundraising. She was very active. In Barcelona, Orwell was fighting in the front line. But he had to spend 3 days here, whole nights, trying to,
watching the infighting. Yeah.
Well, I mean, fighting against the communist side, you know, that was a terrible, you know, division, because they're being persecuted by that time. The left had their own civil war going on, and that's one of the reasons why the Republican side lost in the end. You know, they were so bitterly divided.
And in fact, these controversies continue, as the next image demonstrates.
Absolutely, yes. And you see that was about the last time I was in Barcelona was about 2 or 3 years ago. So I found out, and there's two images, but, you know, 2 different walls. But, you know, the anarchists being defaced by probably the Communist Party sympathizers, and then communists there, estudiante organizati lucha, to students organize and struggle. I guess injustice, I suppose, but I mean, still bitterly divided.
It continues.
And here the caption, this is a caption, one of the excerpts from Homage to Catalonia. The Stalinists were in the saddle, and therefore it was a matter of course that every Trotskyist was in danger.
Yes. So as well as being very much a part of the conflict that was going on there, obviously after he was injured, he couldn't actively participate anymore. And there are those strange passages in the book where he actually feels himself to be a kind of a tourist there. And I think the next image is actually sort of explores that slightly kind of surreal floating section. It's about Barbastro, isn't it? That one there. Say something about this.
That's in Barbastro. That's near the front line, but it was not so far, not so close. Sorry, to the trenches. So he managed to after. So he was almost fatally wounded. Let's not forget that. He was very lucky. The bullet went right through his throat. Very lucky that it was a quiet. It was just a sniper. It wasn't a big battle going on, but. It wasn't very busy that time, and we managed to get evacuated to a decent hospital and then sent to Tarragona for better treatment, which is just about 100 km down the road. Recovered in Barcelona, eventually he had to go back and fight. And then with Eileen, he went around this, a bit of tourism, and it got it's a lovely line, you know. I was free to go back to England. I felt able almost for the first time to look at Spain, and seemed queerly different now. Wandering through it, became aware of the pleasant, tortured streets, old stone bridges, wine shops, and great boozy barrels. So we had a good time, and in a timeless part of Spain.
So anyway, he eventually gets to the French border. We have an image of him slipping across the border here. Another one of these
the border, yes,
temporizations.
Yes.
Yes. Say something about that.
This actually wasn't taken in the border. It was taken in Paris, but but it's in France. It was tough. They just managed to get passports, and it wasn't easy. And they took a train across to, and they didn't stay very long in certainly not in Argenteuil, in the border town, which later became a big refugee center for all the Republicans, many of them betrayed by the French. The Popular Front in France was supportive of the Republicans at first, but then they compromised, and then the Second World War. Let's not forget that the Civil War was a bit of a preamble to the much bigger and terrible conflict that happened following year. So
now, the next images are about that very striking passage at the end of Homage to Catalonia about getting back to England. And I mean, we'll talk a little bit when we come to coming up for air later on about his attitude towards England. He obviously did have a very sort of strong nostalgic tie to the place, as well as a deep ambivalence about that tie itself. I remember a Conservative Prime Minister, John Major, quoting Orwell as if there was nothing problematic about his attachment to England, whereas actually for him it was actually problematic. These are some images evocative of that closing passage in the Homage to Catalonia. That's right, yeah.
Then England, Southern England, was the England I had known in my childhood. Familiar streets posted telling of cricket matches and royal weddings. I have to show that as well. But then he,
is this also?
Contrast that with the red bus of the policemen, all sleep in the deep, deep sleep of England, from which I sometimes fear that we shall never wake till we are jerked out of it by the roar of bombs. So I tried to contemporize that with all the conflicts we face in now. The terrible tragedy of the Grenfell Tower, totally unresolved, and now we're going through the inquiry that's going to go on for ages. And the main players are trying to get scot-free. Disturbances we had in 2011, and then more recently, now we got the English Defence League, Robinson there, and a very kind of pressing, issues that we have to tackle with urgency, environmental issues and the Great Greta Thunberg. So I contrasted those two images, so I thought they did quite well.
That's a very, very provocative to put those two images together, but that's good. He was a provocateur. That's right. That's how it ought to be.
He was an agent provocateur. Yeah.
Right. Now, the September 1938, Orwell he'd already been in a sanatorium with tuberculosis. He managed to get himself to Morocco for 6 months to find somewhere warm to recover. And the next section is about that time that he was also writing Coming Up for Air, that novel which we'll perhaps talk a little bit about, and wrote a wonderful essay on his experience in Morocco called Marrakesh. Just say something about these images, William.
I was lucky enough through a friend who helped me to find his. So he spent a few weeks in near the Medina, the old Medina, the old town in Marrakesh, and then they rented a Villa Simon, just about five kilometers out of town on the Casablanca road, and I just went around the Medina and found the house where he stayed. So probably the mosque, the Koutoubia Mosque, a famous landmark, Marrakesh, would have been, what he's seeing through the back window of the apartment where they're staying. Now it's a cafe. I went upstairs and managed to create that picture, and that's and the old town, the Medina. And he also mentioned. So I use excerpt from Marrakesh, but also from his diaries, and a quote about Ramadan began. So it was quite something for him. And I happened to be there at Ramadan, and I captured it's a beautiful light, in Morocco. We enjoyed that.
I mean, one of the striking things about that essay is the way that he evokes this very multicultural city. In fact,
That's right.
We'll talk a little bit about the you've talked about Ramadan. We'll talk about the Jewish quarter in a moment. There's also, you went to visit the Christian cemetery there, and the Senegalese troops who figure, as you'll see in the text there, in a very remarkable passage in that essay. Just say something about these two images, William.
Yeah, I mean, so I just Marrakesh is it's a crossroads and a big sort of market town. So the Berbers and the Arab majority, but also a lot of Sub-Saharan Africans that go there. A Senegalese gentleman here working in the famous Yinfena Square. So I tried to get it from the back, and I went to the cemetery. I photographed that plaque. I have a long list of all those who went, like all kind of like the same principle that, in all colonial powers, they send the local people being colonized as cannon fodder to the front line. And the tirailleurs Senegalese, they were busy in 1914 and in 1945, the two world wars. And these are all the ones who were killed. There were, hundreds of them in the cemetery. And it's a wonderful paragraph there at the end.
It is. Yeah, it's worth pointing up, I think, a connection here with the work in Burma. I mean, he was consistent. Once he'd seen how empires worked, he was consistent in his condemnation of it, and particularly in the Marrakesh essay about the way colonized peoples are made invisible by those who colonize them. And actually, he kind of accused tourism of something similar, in fact, in the same essay. But the main drift of it is an anti-imperial thing. The next one is the synagogue. Marrakesh at that time had a thriving Jewish community. And again, this is another interesting thing about Orwell. There is in his early work, as many of you will be aware, down out in Paris and London, there's some quite sort of full-on unpleasant anti-Semitism in that book. You can see him as he develops as a writer and as a human being, that this begins to shift. And in this essay, it's quite clear that he's moved on very much from some of the sort of youthful grumblings. And that's another interesting kind of a side aspect of this essay, but it's also there. Yeah, you want to say anything about that? Yeah.
Yeah, he was shocked by the situation of the Jewish community there. All traders, carpenters, shopkeepers, and all that. They were kind of marginalized by the larger Arab population, at that time. Most of them now that have left, but there's still some of the synagogues and the shops and places of worship. They still remain. And you're right. He was, and by doing that, he foresaw the more terrible kind of events leading to Holocaust in the Second World War.
Now, the next image. Just say something about the influences on you as a photographer. That's a very strong image in its own right. What sort of training did you have as a photographer? Who mattered to you?
I went to Newport to documentary photography and filmmaking, and I was there with the head tutor and the founder, course founder was David Hearn, a noted Magnum photographer, and he was very kind of very encouraging, very positive. Always send you back to shoot the stuff again, but I would say it in a nice way. This works all right, Julio, but I mean, going through contact sheets in the olden days, China graph, but go back and try to get that pace a bit more and move around a bit more, work harder, push, So it pushed me, and a lot of the guest photographers, Don McCollin came as a guest tutor, old friend of David Hearn. So great about war photography and conflict, and Faith Godwin, a wonderful photographer. She's a landscape photographer, and I developed a taste for landscape, and it really helps, to put in documentary. It helps to put people in context.
Yeah, of course. And the next image is the Berber community you went into. That's right?
It's a lovely line because he went to the Hayat in Marrakesh. From Marrakesh, he went with Eileen to the mountains to have a break, and to the Hayat. It's a beautiful part of the world and of Morocco, and he makes a lot of comments about, and the native Moroccans, First Nation Moroccans, are the Berbers, who were there before the Arabs arrived. And makes a lot of comment about how lively the women are, but also, how gay the people are, dancing and celebrating and not wearing headscarf, most of them. And it was a nice time. So I went to an event in Marrakesh. I was there during the African Arts Fair in February. It was the last trip before lockdown.
Wow.
Many times, and of course, some of the pictures before. And that was part of an event run by Berber women supporting women weavers in their communities. And I thought it was quite fitting to use that picture there.
Yeah, it's true. You mentioned Faye Godwin as a landscape photographer that you admire very much. This is actually the final kind of image. Do you want to say something about this one?
So he went all the way up to Tedert, which is a village in the High Atlas. For about a week or so, we went there twice because I'm really fascinated by mountain scene. It was, he loved nature as well. So I went around in the region, and it just, doesn't feel like it changed much. Of course, you see the mosque and the same kind of a barren landscape, but also the only difference now is satellite dishes. And I put it into my period, part of my period pictures. So use the vignettes and sepia effects to give it a period format. But there's something eerie about seeing the satellite dishes there.
There is. That's right. And I think in some ways it connects with one of the things we haven't really covered yet. I hope there'll be time in the Q&A. Is Orwell's writings obviously about surveillance, about mass communication. For him, that meant principally radio or this invented telescreen thing of his. But we are obviously living, in fact, we are living as we speak, we are living a very different kind of technology. And it's very interesting to speculate what he would have made of that, or perhaps to ask to what extent he predicted correctly where we are now in all of that. But I think we now move on to the back cover of the book, don't we?
Yeah, so it's totally prophetic, all he did, and that's a reflection of that in there, yes. And that's the back cover, and we finish with it. Just Press, wonderful logo.
Yes, thank you, Just Press.
Thank you, Just Press.
Thank you very much. Thank you both of you for a very interesting conversation. I hope there are plenty of questions from people. I know there's a lot more that both of them could have said. And I'm wondering, Alex, would you like to come in again now?
And now my firstborn, Alex, is going to give us a wonderful song. Thank you all so much.
As I lay on my back with the sun in my eyes, soon I will know what no living man knows. All of my life's been a fight against lies. Death brings the truth, now it's my turn to know. Send my mother a lock of my hair. Send my father the watch that he gave me. Tell my brother to follow me if he dares. Tell them I'm lost now where no one can save me. Remember, remember. Send my love little yellow roses. My father taught me that all men are equal, whatever color, religion, or land. Taught me to fight for the things I believe in. This I have done with a gun in my hand. So send my mother a lock of my hair. Send my father the watch that he gave me. Tell my brother to follow me if he dares. Tell them I'm lost now where no one can save me. Remember, remember. Send my love little yellow roses.